There is a specific kind of exhaustion that has nothing to do with how much you slept. It is the feeling of being 23 and carrying the emotional weight of someone twice your age. Of sitting in a room full of people your age and feeling, quietly but unmistakably, like you are watching them from a distance you cannot explain and cannot close. You find their concerns small, their dramas exhausting, their lightness almost foreign. And somewhere in the back of your mind, a question you have never said out loud. Why does everyone else seem so unbothered by things that feel, to you, absolutely enormous? Psychology has a great deal to say about why some people feel a decade older than they actually are. And the answer is not what most people expect. Because this is not about being more mature. It is not about having it together. It is about what the brain does when it is asked to grow up faster than it was designed to. What psychologists actually call this, researchers in developmental psychology use a concept called accelerated maturation to describe the process by which certain individuals move through emotional and cognitive development at a significantly faster rate than their peers. And here is the key finding. This acceleration almost never happens in comfortable environments. It happens under pressure. The brain is not random in how it develops. It is deeply responsive to its environment. And when that environment signals danger, instability, or emotional complexity early in life, the brain prioritizes certain systems. It builds capacity for threat detection, emotional reading, and long-term consequence thinking far ahead of schedule. What you end up with is a nervous system that is, in many measurable ways, older than the body it lives in. But what triggers that acceleration? That is where the research gets genuinely interesting. Where it comes from for a large number of people who carry this quality, the roots trace back to childhood or early adolescence. Not always in dramatic or obvious ways. Sometimes it was a household where one parent was emotionally volatile, and the child learned, almost automatically, to read the room before entering it. Sometimes it was chronic unpredictability, never knowing which version of a parent or caregiver was going to show up. Sometimes it was simply being the responsible one, the one who held things together, the one others leaned on before they were old enough to understand what leaning even meant. Psychologists refer to this as parentification, a process in which a child takes on emotional or functional responsibilities that belong to adults. And the research on its long-term effects is remarkably consistent. Children who are parentified early develop what looks like wisdom from the outside, but what is actually a survival strategy from the inside. They become experts at anticipating other people's needs, at managing emotional atmospheres, at staying one step ahead of whatever might go wrong. Their brain essentially runs a constant background process that most adults spend decades trying to develop intentionally. The problem is that this process comes with a cost. And most people who live with it do not realize how high that cost actually is. What is happening in the brain neurologically? This connects to two intersecting systems. The first is the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for abstract thinking, risk assessment, and long-term planning. Under chronic early stress, this region develops connectivity and activation patterns more typical of older individuals. The result is someone who thinks in consequences, who plans compulsively, and who finds it genuinely difficult to be fully present in a moment without simultaneously calculating what the moment might become. The second system is the amygdala, the brain's threat detection center. In people who grew up in emotionally unpredictable environments, the amygdala is often calibrated to stay alert longer, react faster, and return to baseline more slowly after stress. This is not anxiety in the clinical sense, though it can become that. It is a nervous system that learned, correctly for its original environment, that relaxing too fully was a mistake, that things could shift without warning. That staying alert was how you stayed safe. Together, these two systems produce someone who is neurologically operating with the caution, the foresight, and the emotional weight of someone much older. And the strange irony is that none of it was chosen. It was simply what the brain decided to become. What it feels like from the inside here is something that rarely gets said about this experience. It is deeply isolating in a way that is very hard to articulate, because from the outside, people who feel older than their age are often admired for it. You are the reliable one. The one people come to with their problems. The one who keeps their composure when everyone else falls apart. And there is a quiet pride in that, sometimes, but there is also a loneliness underneath it. Because the very thing that makes you perceptive is also what makes casual connection difficult. When you are wired to read emotional subtext, small talk does not stay small for long. You are already 3 layers deep in a conversation that the other person thinks is about the weather. When you are wired to think in long-term consequences, you cannot always access the easy, unguarded joy of a moment that does not carry weight yet. People your age do not feel like peers in the traditional sense. And people significantly older than you sometimes feel more familiar, but still do not quite fit, because your experiences and theirs arrived at different times and through different doors. The result is a kind of in-between feeling. Too old for one room, not old enough for another, and quietly unsure which room you actually belong in. What this actually reveals about you. But here is what the psychology consistently shows, and it matters to hear this clearly. The qualities that come with this kind of accelerated development are not ordinary. The capacity to read emotional nuance, to anticipate consequences, to hold complexity without flinching. These are skills that most people spend enormous effort trying to build and never fully reach. Research on emotional intelligence and what psychologists call mentalizing ability, the capacity to accurately model the internal states of other people, shows that individuals who experienced high emotional demand early in life tend to score significantly higher on these measures than their peers. They are less surprised by human contradiction, less destabilized by ambiguity, more capable of sitting with discomfort without immediately needing to resolve it. There is also a quality of attentiveness in these people that tends to leave a mark on everyone who encounters it. They listen in a way that is rarer than it should be. They notice what is not being said as much as what is. And they carry relationships with a kind of seriousness, a kind of investment, that most people only bring to a handful of connections across an entire lifetime. None of this erases the difficulty, but it does mean something. The weight was not pointless. The things it built in you are real. The part nobody talks about, and yet, there is a tension that psychologists who work with this population return to again and again, because the same strengths that make these individuals remarkable also tend to make self-compassion genuinely hard. When your baseline is high competence under pressure, rest feels like failure. When your default mode is anticipating other people's needs, identifying your own starts to feel unfamiliar, almost suspicious. Many people who carry this older than their age quality also carry a quiet but persistent belief that their needs are secondary, that they are built for endurance, not for ease, that somewhere along the line they were given a version of life that required more from them, and the response to that was simply to give more. Indefinitely. What therapy, and specifically what approaches like internal family systems and compassion-focused therapy try to gently dismantle, is not the competence. It is that belief. The belief that the weight is permanent. That rest has to be earned. That the part of you that wants lightness, wants ease, wants to exist without managing everything and everyone around you, is somehow asking for too much. What psychology points toward the insight that keeps surfacing across research on early emotional maturation is this. The adaptation served a purpose. It was intelligent. It kept you functional in an environment that would have overwhelmed a different nervous system. But adaptations are not permanent assignments. They are responses to conditions that can change. The mind that learned to stay alert in an unpredictable environment can, with enough experience of safety, begin to update that calibration. Slowly, non-linearly, with plenty of reversals, but genuinely, the prefrontal cortex stays plastic far longer than most people realize. The nervous system is not fixed. And the patterns that formed under pressure are not the only patterns available to you. What all of this points to is something both simple and genuinely difficult to internalize. Feeling older than your age is not evidence that something went wrong with you. It is evidence that your brain was doing something very specific in response to something very real. Understanding that does not undo the years, but it does change what they mean. And sometimes, that shift in meaning is exactly where something new begins to grow.